Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is a somewhat quick video on just some alcohol ink embellishments on your given scenes, adding shadows primarily, but you can go in and layer some additional colors like in your skies and whatnot using very light values of your given inks, and depending on your color scheme, what colors to use in these scenes and whatnot. And that is the next step in the process. And anyways, hope this video comes in handy for you. A lot of you have alcohol pens, and they're really fun to use over the tops of dye-based ink scenes. Okay, let's see if we can't finish these scenes off a little bit more than they are. What we have right now are a lot of compositions using glossy cardstock and dye-based inks. I've used some gel pen on this one right here, and I think that's about it. But most of them are just what I call the basic stamping, okay? The impressions and color applications using the same type of ink, meaning dye-based inks. All right, but now, what I'd like to do, maybe not on every one of these scenes. I would say some of these scenes are kind of resolved as far as their shading scheme and thus the lighting scheme is concerned. But some of them can use a little bit more detailing, I would say, to complete the look. Okay, now I'm going to be using some of my alcohol ink pens right here. This one's the Shuttle Art 88 set. It just has a big selection of various hue, a variety of hue in various values of that hue. I like the really light ones. I don't use the darker ones too much, but you know, they came in the set, so I don't know, I might have some application for them at some point in time, but I'll just be going with some of the lighter hues. Now, what I use these types of pens for are for my areas where something like a sponge application of color, you know, a wide sponge specifically, getting some tone into some areas just really isn't, this isn't the most conducive tool for that. So a fine tip pen in the right values can really give that to me. All right, now see down here, what I like to do, now you're not going to be able to see too much of a change with this because this is a very light value, but I can get in here. I like to start off with a very light value and work darker. I feel this gives me the most control. And what I'm doing, let me see if I can get that. Yes, I do have that stamp right here, that Lakeside Cove right here, but you can see where there are shadows rendered into this design just inherently, okay? I've added a lot more dots down at the base of the rocks to try to give these rocks the illusion of a three-dimensional form. All right, now where do you color? Well, what I like to do is I just go in and I reiterate that shading that is in the design. Okay, so I'm just, where do you add shade? Well, you add shade, or this color, where there's already kind of a darker part of those rocks, okay? I mean, you can color other parts of it if you want to. Now, I'm just going with grayscale, naturally, because this is a grayscale stamping. Okay, now that was some cool gray. That's a 0.5. I should have pulled this out before. Here's a cool gray. Here's a cool gray. CG3. Here's a CG1. So this is a 0.5. CG1 right here. Let's try that one. Okay. And see here, I'm just doing it basically in the same areas because this is still a fairly light value of gray. And what this does in a very subtle way, I mean, if I'm doing it with a very light value, is it adds a little bit more kind of volume and mass to these rocks. It kind of anchors them down a little bit more than they already are, and it makes them seem a little bit more three-dimensional when I do something like this. Okay. That was the 3. Here's the 5. This is probably getting a little bit, darker. This is probably like a 50%, I would say. And I can hit it in my rocks here and there. It kind of creates this little oscillation between light and dark, which in turn can potentially lead to a richer overall surface to look at. Okay, so there we go. See, these rocks are a little more rounded in form, I would say. See where this rock is separated by, this little bit of shading right here between that rock behind it. I mean, there's shade already inherent, but I can add a little bit more of this. Now, this is a cool gray. I mean, you could add a warm gray as well. This is kind of a neutral gray that I've stamped this out in, but let's try like something like a warm gray. Here's a warm gray 4. Something like that. If I want to test that out a little bit. It's a little bit too brownish for me. Let me go to a 0.5 warm gray and kind of blend that out a little bit. Okay. So you can kind of add some of that in. Your lighter tones can almost act as kind of a blending pen as well. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of wiping off some of that warm gray that I added down there. And it's on my tip here, but I'm just kind of spreading it out a little bit. And this is a warm gray as well. See, like that. But see, that adds a little touch of temperature in there. It's a little bit of a warmish tinge. And I mean, I could put some of in my water as well, like so. Just for a change in, or a tweak, I would say, in my temperature range within the scene. So there we go with that. All right, now this scene right here is really quite similar to this one, except in this one I've used value to kind of push the depth within the scene. Okay, instead of stamping out my Lakeside Cove large in black, I've stamped it in gray, so it looks like it kind of sets back into the scene a little bit more. Now, what I would do for something like this is I just wouldn't move into my darker, gray values that I just used. I might just use the cool gray 0.5 and the 1. I don't think I would use the 3 or the 5 because it just doesn't get that dark back in here like this one. You don't want the shadows to be darker than, the darkest areas back there. So that's what's nice about these types of pens. You can buy these sets, or you can buy like any alcohol markers in a range of values within their given hue. Okay. Hitting those area shadows back in there. Let's go with that was the 0.5. Let's go with the 1, and I'll just go along the kind of right at the base of the rocks maybe, just to define it ever so slightly more in very specific areas with my, fine tip point of my pen. Okay, so anyways, hitting those areas right in here. Now, I don't need to do all of these. I think you get the point right here. This one right here, I mean, I do have some shading in here, and that looks pretty good. I mean, I can hit a little bit more if I wanted to. Let's go with something like, I don't know, like a baby blue right here. Pretty bright. I can hit it right in here. Okay. It's going to look a little bit darker than what it will look like when it's dry, but I can kind of hit it in my shaded areas. And what I like to do is I like to go in with a darker tone, and then I go in with my lighter tone, and again, I'll use that as kind of like a little blending device. Okay, let's see. Let me go in with my, I think that's my, well, here's a little bit of a blue-gray, that'll be good. Okay, and just kind of blend it on in. Get some of my water, put a few little streaks in my water. Little striations across the surface like so. Okay. They're like colored glazes, you know, and what's nice about the alcohol pens is that if I've used dye-based inks to color my scene with, the alcohol inks won't smear or put back into solution the dye-based inks that have already been laid down. A little bit different than, say, using, you know, the watercolor pens of old, going over a watercolor stamped image and colored scene. It might kind of mix it a little bit, which you can use to your advantage sometime too, but it's nice to be able to have a little bit more control over it with an alcohol-based pen. Okay, we have this scene down here. It's a little bit more green down below here. Let's use, let's start off with a pale green and hit that in my shadows. Ooh, that one's really quite bright here. Now, I haven't sprayed these scenes, but I could do that and it'll make everything much more vibrant, and this color will blend in a little bit more. It's looking a little bit more intense right around in here. It's because I need to spray this and it'll bring the intensity of all of this together to match that intensity of the that the alcohol pens are laying down. But just hitting it in my shadows right here. This is a fairly light color again. But let's try this one. Here's a deep olive green. As long as the hue kind of matches reasonably well, you can use it. You don't have to match things exactly, you know, the colors don't have to have the same name or something like that, like a olive green 1 and olive green 2 and olive green 3, you know, to create those variations. Mix and match a little bit. Here's a yellow green right here. Here's a brown green. Kind of blend those tones out. You can blend it into the rocks as well. Okay. My rocks are a little bit of a different color. Let's try some of the grays in there, okay? Grays over the top of blue probably won't read as that color of gray. It'll just read as shadow, okay? Because you'll have the gray from the coloring of those rocks showing through this color, because these colors are transparent, okay? So the colors underneath will influence what you see as an end result of that layering. Okay, so if I lay, in other words, if I lay this gray over the top of that, the color that's already underneath it will show through. So colors that you've already laid down in a very light tone aren't lost, you know. It's not, you know, a lost cause or a meaningless layer underneath there. Everything kind of adds up to the overall, and working through layering like that really kind of gives everything kind of a little bit more of a three-dimensional kind of end result. Okay, so that was gray. The rocks in here are a little bit more dimensional now, and we've anchored down a little bit more with some of that shadow. It's a little bit too bright for me, but like I said, when I spray this, and I'll do that later, it'll bring up the intensity of this. If you have like a Copic marker system too, I mean, you can use the spray brush type of nozzle type of effect, and that's really fun. Okay, let's go with this one right here. Some of these, I mean, they're fine as is. This is just kind of that little extra touch you can do. And plus, I mean, who doesn't like coloring, you know? But adding a little bit down here in the shadows. Don't see these three-dimensional forms too. These rocks are not like outlines. They're more of a kind of dark on the bottom, light on the top type of thing. Sometimes when people see rocks or something like that, they're thinking still in terms of like an outline design. Like, let's imagine these are rocks or something like that, okay? And what we're doing right here is we're doing more of this type of thing right here, okay? Adding some shadows at the base like this. Okay. And here's a lighter version of it. You know, we're going to sort of something like this, okay? So there's a little more gradations. If it's top lit, then it's light on the top, and if it's like that, you'll have kind of shadows down here at the base. Here's a, let me go with an even darker gray, I think. This is darker, or is this one I just used? You know, see, I can kind of put this right at the base, and these forms are a little bit darker on the base. But sometimes when people see a rock, they're used to doing more of a kind of outlined color type of application of inks. So what they'll do is they'll just kind of fill it in completely and say, okay, there's my coloring. You know, I stayed within the lines and it's like that. But this has a little bit more, there's a little bit more of a three-dimensional form aspect of it, okay? So, going like this, I'm just kind of going on the base of like, you know, say this rock right here, I'll just add it down at the base, and I'll kind of leave the tops as is, okay? Now, some of them already have color from the use of the stylus tool, but that's where I'm just kind of refining it with a little bit more value, okay? These are double-sided every time I'm looking at this to make sure that I'm using the fine tip side, not the broad tip, kind of chisel tip. I like using the fine tips. Yours might be brush tips, same thing, just use the brush tip side, okay? But see, to me, I think these rocks look a little bit more dimensional this way. We're just kind of adding this right down here at the base, see that? Kind of leaving the top as is, or if the top has color, it's just the lighter version. Something like that. Where it matches the water. In the water there too, I mean it's blue, so I mean I could hit some of that blue area in here, like right at the base, and I can add a little bit of shadows down here, right along the where the rock meets the water's surface. You can kind of add some blue down here, right alongside like that. And then what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll blend that color out a little bit. It's a little bit too bright, so I just go in with what lighter. This is like a blue-gray. It's very, very light. Okay, see that? And I'll just kind of blend that out to make, you know, kind of bring it in to a little bit more harmony. Put a few streaks across here. Maybe I will use my chisel tip like this. It's so light, you know. I can just kind of go right in there and it's no big deal. After all, it is a very light value of that, okay? Maybe you can bring it up in the sky if you want to. Something like this. Okay. Down here in my water. This is what one of the beauties of these lighter values. You can kind of really play around with them without having too much of a commitment to that given hue. I mean, if I was doing something like that, I wouldn't want to do it with something like this cobalt blue. Okay, so things are looking a little bit more rounded in form with all these. Here's kind of more of a sun-city color. We have these sun-city colors matching the sky down here in the water, reflecting those colors of the sky. So, let's try a little bit of tone in here. Here's a vivid pink. I'm just grabbing the, I mean, there's no, like, you know, you don't have to get too super particular about it, but, you know, those kind of are within this range of tones down here. What they'll look like, I don't know. I mean, I have, you know, kind of a reasonable idea. This is very bright down here. It's too bright, okay? So orange along that. It's really standing out. Too much, you know. So, just go back in with your lighter value. This is pink, and I'll just kind of blend it out. Sometimes people say, well, alcohol pens or certain brands or whatever don't blend well on glossy cardstock. The way that I do it, it blends just fine. I'm not doing like vast areas of color, which maybe is something that they're referring to, but I have no problem, you know, going in here and putting inks back into solution and, you know, kind of spreading them around and blending them in. It should, because alcohol inks kind of sit on the surface of your paper a little bit more so than, say, a matte paper or something like that. And if alcohol ink is sitting on the surface of the paper, even if it's dry, if you hit it with alcohol ink again, it'll go back into solution, because that's what alcohol inks do. So, I don't know. There might be some types of things that I'm unaware of, but for my purposes, this works just fine. Okay, I'm no expert on these either, by any means. I used to use pens back in my school days, and there was a set or brand of pens called Studio 2, which were very nice. I wasn't a design student, so the design students had to use those like ad markers or chart pack and whatnot ones, those ones that have a really strong kind of xylene scent to them. And they used them for their comps, you know, comprehensives, their layouts and everything like that. And they really had to get really good at those things. But I was an illustration student, and we didn't use really markers at all, so my markers of choice, being that I wanted to use them for some things, were the Studio 2s, but they are no longer around anyway. But anyways, okay, so you can see that where it's very, very bright, and it looks dull around here because my inks are dry. So what I'll do is I will spray this, and it'll bring back the vibrancy, and the whole thing will be that vibrant. Okay, so here's the Aurora Borealis one. I think you get the point. I'll kind of move forward here very shortly. Oh, here. Here's my yellow, green, and brown green. Going in here and hitting some of my shadow areas of my rocks. Kind of hitting the base of the rocks. Even though this is a very light green, it's still darker than some of the areas were already. Here's my brown gray, I think it almost sounds better to say gray brown. I don't know why. Okay. Right down here in the water. Kind of adding a little bit more shadow to my water area, or more specifically, where rock meets water. Alright, I think this is going to be my blending tool. I think I need a bit of a darker one. Here's a deep olive green. Didn't I just use that deep olive green? Let's see, not the chisel tip. Okay. Okay, let's try a, my warm gray looked more of like a reddish tinge, didn't it? I have these other colors too from Plume. Let me see my other set over here. These are Plume permanents. They're alcohol pens as well. A little bit more of a peachish look, but let's see, this one's Spearmint. These are single-sided brush ones. Well, these ones are a lot squeakier. Maybe it's because, I guess it's because of the brush. Yeah, that's kind of spreading out. See, I mean, this is even mixing and matching brands. but I'm putting some of that, you know, the Shuttle art ones back into solution. Okay, that's pretty good. I think we had a sea mist or something like that. Melon. Okay, this one's a very, very light green. Perfect. And I'll use that as my blending. You can use a blender brush pen too. It doesn't have to be a lighter version of your colors, but see this right here? This is just kind of blending everything and kind of putting it back into solution. Okay, kind of going along my rocks down there. It, I don't know, I think it enhanced it somewhat. It's very subtle, and that's what I usually do. I just kind of go for colors that are a little bit darker. You know, I don't go all the way to black or something like that. I guess you could if you wanted to. Here's let me try this cool gray for my shadows. Actually, that looks pretty good. Just right at the base of things. It's because I say that because when I add this cool gray down, it doesn't look like cool gray. It looks like some darker version of green, just because it is a darker hue, and again, it's transparent and the colors are showing through. I wanted my rocks to get a little bit more kind of rendered after I did this Aurora Borealis. I just wanted to create somewhat of a separation between sky and reflection. So a lot of the rocks had that same, you know, that lighting scheme in the rocks, and I want those rocks to seem a little bit more like they're opaque and not, you know, transparent with everything showing through them like that. Okay, so that is an example of just some subtle little things to do with markers. A lot of you have markers out there, and this is a good way to utilize them. Now, if I had things like a cabin or something like that in the woods, you know, sometimes I can tone, you know, give it an overall tone of brown or something like that. But if you really want to get some wood grain or something like that kind of drawn in, then pens are a good way to go. Sometimes I go, you know, light, then I go dark, and then I go back to light again to blend kind of those darker marks. And sometimes they're a little bit harsh looking. But one of the beautiful things about alcohol markers, again, is that they go back into solution and you can blend them right back in again. That's why they have those blender pens, you know. So, I mean, you could go light, dark, blender too. But I tend to stay with my same hue that I'm working in. I don't know, most of the time. A lot of the time, I kind of make it a circular process as opposed to just going from light, medium, dark, or something like that. You know, you can kind of bring it back around and go back to some other tones. At no point in time, you know, I mean, dye-based inks really don't stick well to kind of a coating of alcohol ink, but you might be able to get a little tinge in there if you want to go back in and do some things like that too. You know, I wouldn't give a big slathering of alcohol inks and try to go back in and color it over with dye base. It may or may not work, you know, give it a try. It just really depends on your brand of inks and stuff like that, and how kind of what the viscosity of the inks are sometimes. You can certainly go over it with probably like a VersaFine or certainly a StazOn ink or something like that. But anyways, those are my subtle little touches using some of the alcohol markers. Let's see. Let me do another video and I'll break this down a little bit more. I'll add in some gel pen touches to these scenes, and we'll kind of, you know, make them seem even more dimensional, hopefully, with the use of specular light, which is light that's brighter than white. It's kind of like, you know, the reflective light coming off of certain objects, and that's certainly what you can do with gel pens. Okay, so anyways, next step in these cards, the next step will be the gel pens, and then we'll go on